We'll talk about Plato's life a little bit today. I think I kind of skipped that when we began talking about him, right? So this would be, I guess, the prelude to it all that I've said so far. But Plato's comprehensive treatment of knowledge was so powerful that his philosophy became one of the most influential strands in the history of Western thought. Unlike his predecessors, who focused on single main problems, Plato brought together all the major concerns of human thought into a coherent body of knowledge. The earliest Greek philosophers, the Milesians, were concerned chiefly with the constitution of physical nature, not the foundations of morality. Similarly, the Eleatic philosophers Parmenides and Zeno were interested chiefly in arguing that reality consists of a changeless, single reality, the One. Heraclitus and the Pythagoreans, on the other hand, described reality as always changing, full of flux, and consisting of a multitude of different things. Socrates and the sophists showed less interest in the physical nature and instead steered philosophy into the arena of morality. Plato's great influence stems from the manner in which he brought all these diverse philosophical concerns into a unified system of thought. I guess that's kind of why I've been so attracted to his philosophy is that it's more of the matter of non-physical or non-nature aspects uh, that occur in life. You know, I would say I like the term "full of flux." I do believe that's a part of life, without a doubt. There's like a expansion and condensing of constant. Same as ups or downs, I believe. But Plato's life. So he was born in Athens in 428/27 BCE, 1 year after the death of Pericles, and when Socrates was about 42 years old. Athenian culture was flourishing, and as Plato's family was one of the most distinguished in Athens, his early training included the rich ingredients of the culture in the arts, politics, and philosophy. His father traced his lineage to the old kings of Athens and before them to the god Poseidon. His mother, Pericetione, was the sister of Charmides and the cousin of Critias, both of whom were leading personalities in the short lived oligarchy that arose following the fall of Athens in the Peloponnesian War. When his father died early in Plato's childhood, his mother married Pyrilampes, who had been a close friend of Pericles. Such close ties with this eminent public figures had a long distinguished Plato's family. This was especially so on his mother's side. An early relative had been a friend of the great lawmaker Solon, and another distant member of the family was the archon, or the highest magistrate, in 644 BCE. So he definitely came from some sort of, I don't know if you want to say silver spoon, but he had support. In such a family atmosphere, Plato learned about public life and developed at an early age a sense of responsibility for public political service. But Plato's attitude toward Athenian democracy was also influenced by what he witnessed during the last stages of the Peloponnesian War. He saw the inability of this democracy to produce great leaders and saw also the way it treated one of its greatest citizens, Socrates. Plato was present at Socrates' trial and was willing to guarantee payment of his fine. The collapse of Athens and the execution of his master, Socrates, could have well led Plato to despair of democracy and to begin formulating a new conception of political leadership in which authority and knowledge are appropriately combined. Seems fairly rational. Plato concluded that, as in the case of a ship where the pilot's authority rests on knowledge of navigation, so also the ship of state should be piloted by someone who has adequate knowledge. He developed this theme at length in his book, Republic. I mean, damn, yeah, think about that, bro. You see your, you see your master get executed, and you're just like, well, yeah, fuck that system. Like what? Like that's the result of my system is the things I believe in and the guy who taught me them that we just kill them and we don't believe that and we can't go against what's already previously been believed. Yeah, I'd want out of that system as well. Anyone with a backbone really would, I would say. Around 387 BCE, when he was about 40 years old, Plato founded the Academy at Athens. This was, in a sense, the first university to emerge in the history of Western Europe, and for 20 years Plato administered its affairs as its director. The chief aim of the Academy was to pursue scientific knowledge through original research. Although Plato was particularly concerned with educating future leaders, he was convinced that their education must consist of rigorous intellectual activity, by which he meant scientific study, including mathematics, astronomy, and harmonics. The scientific emphasis, I apologize, at the Academy was in sharp contrast to the activities of Plato's contemporary Isocrates, Isocrats, who took a more practical approach to training young people for public life. Isocrates had little use for science, holding that pure research had no practical value or humanistic interest, but Plato put mathematics into the center of his curriculum, arguing that the best preparation for those who would wield political power was the interested pursuit of truth, the aim of scientific knowledge. A brilliant group of scholars associated with the Academy made significant advances over the mathematical knowledge of the older Pythagoreans, and this activity caused the famous mathematician Eudoxus to bring his own school from Cyzicus to unite with Plato's Academy in Athens. The execution of Socrates deeply disillusioned Plato about politics, thus diverting him personally from an active life of public service. Plato nevertheless continued to teach the rigorous knowledge must be the proper training of the ruler. He gained a wide reputation for this view and was invited to Syracuse, a place he traveled to at least 3 times, to give instruction to a young tyrant, Diosynus II. His efforts did not meet with success since his student's education was started too late and his character was too weak. Plato continued to write in his later years, and while still active in the academy, he died in 348/47 BCE at the age of 80. I just always like fantasize about what it would be like to be able to go somewhere and be taught things from someone like that, or just be able to talk like that. I might have referenced this before, but there's a movie called Midnight in Paris with like who the hell's the actor in that? Owen Williams. I don't know if that's right, but somebody, and he basically just goes back in time. And in France, there was this cafe where all these great, basically all artists and painters that we talk about now would go and congregate and talk. And it's like, yes, share ideas, build off one another. It's like we don't have that communal aspect at all, and we're so interconnected supposedly through the internet and social media and all these platforms that we have available and accessible to us, but it is of no use really in terms of connecting us on a more spiritual level. They say about like 80 or 90% of communication is body language, and so if we're communicating solely through screens and text, then a lot is lost in translation there. Plato lectured at the academy without the use of notes, which I like, because his lectures were never written down, they were never ever published. Although notes by his students were circulated, Aristotle, for example, who entered the academy in 367 BCE when he was 18 years old, took notes of Plato's lectures. Nevertheless, Plato did compose more than 20 philosophical dialogues, with the longest one running around 200 pages. Scholars debate the exact chronology of these dialogues, but they are now commonly placed in 3 groups. The first is a group of early writings, usually called Socratic dialogues because of their preoccupation with ethics. These consist of the Apology, Credo, Charmides, Lats, Euthyphro, Euthyphro, Euthydemus, Critias, Protagoras, and Gorgias. The second group, in which the theory of forms of metaphysical theories are expounded, include the Meno, Symposium, Phaedo, Republic, and Phaedrus. Later in life, Plato wrote some more technical dialogues that often display an attitude of deepening religious conviction. These include the Theaetetus, Parmenides, Sophist, Statesman, Philebus, Timaeus, and Laws. There's no work to which we can go to find the schematic arrangement of Plato's thought. Different dialogues address different issues, and many of his treatments shifted over time. Nevertheless, dominant themes emerge from the various dialogues to which we will now turn. And then that's kind of where we go into the allegory of the cave, which is on one of my previous episodes of Plato, I believe on the second, if you would like to go back into that. But today, what we're going to talk about we'll talk about the concept of the soul. Something light. That's just not that funny, but it kind of is because it's not that light, you know. I mean, like, yeah, like, what does soul mean to you, you know? The concept of the soul. In the Republic, Plato describes the soul as having three parts, which he calls reason, spirit, and appetite. He based this three-part conception of the soul on the common experience of eternal confusion and conflict that all humans share. When he analyzed the nature of this conflict, he discovered that there are three different kinds of activity going on in the person. First, there is an awareness of a goal or a value. This is the act of reason. Second, there is the drive toward action, the spirit, which is neutral at first but responds to the direction of reason. Last, there is the desire for the things of the body, the appetites. What made Plato ascribe these activities to the soul was his assumption that the soul is the principle of life and movement. The body by itself is inanimate, and therefore, when it acts or moves, it must be moved by the principle of life, the soul. Our reason could suggest a goal for behavior only to be overcome by sensual appetite, and the power of the spirit could be pulled in either direction by these sensual desires. Plato illustrated this human condition in the Phaedrus, where he portrays the charioteer driving two horses. One horse, Plato says, is good and needs no touch of the whip, but is guided by word and admonition only. The other is bad and is the mate of insolence and pride, hardly yielding to whip and spur. Though the charioteer has a clear vision of where to go and the good horse is on course, the bad horse plunges and runs away, giving all manner of trouble to his companion and the charioteer. Plato vividly illustrates the breakdown of order with the image of horses moving in opposite directions and the charioteer standing helpless as his commands go unheeded. The charioteer, by being what he is, namely the one who holds the reins, has the duty, the right, and the function, to guide and control the horses. In the same way, the rational part of the soul has the right to rule the spirited and appetitive parts. To be sure, the charioteer cannot get anywhere without the two horses, and for this reason, these three are linked and must work together to achieve their goals. The rational part of the soul has this same sort of relation to its other parts, for the powers of appetite and spirit are indispensable to life itself. Reason works on spirit and appetite, and these two also move and affect reason, but the relation of reason to spirit and appetite is determined by what reason is, namely a goal-seeking and measuring faculty. Of course, the passions also engage in goal-seeking, for they constantly seek the goal of pleasure. Pleasure is a legitimate goal of life. However, the passions are simply drives towards the things that give pleasure. As such, the passions cannot distinguish between objects that provide higher or longer lasting pleasure and those that only appear to provide these pleasures. It is the function of the rational part of the soul to seek the true goal of human life, and it does this by evaluating things according to their true nature. I love all of that. I know that was a lot. You can just go back. I just like it a lot, and I'm gonna keep going. The passions or appetites might lead us into a world of fantasy and deceive us into believing that certain kinds of pleasures will bring us happiness. It is then the unique role of reason to penetrate the world of fantasy and discover the true world, and thereby direct the passion to objects of love that are capable of producing true pleasure and true happiness. And that's something I thought of today actually was where I strongly believe that like fantasy has its place. Reality does also. Fantasy's place is like that one quote from Rat Ferreira where he says, an artist's job is to report back the frontiers of consciousness. It's like fantasy, let's say, is the frontiers of consciousness. And then there's reality. We can't live over here. Some maybe have unique lives where we can and they do, but that's not what reality can be based in. We need to be able to live over here and grab things from over there and bring them back over here. And I think that's an issue that we're starting to deal with. And I guess we'll speak about that a little later because I want to talk about kind of what the governmental systems that Plato had in mind of were order of degeneration, basically. And that may fit into one of the causes, perhaps. Man. When we confuse appearance with reality, we become unhappy and experience a general disorder of the human soul. This confusion occurs chiefly when our passions override our reason. This is why Plato argued, as Socrates had before him, before he was executed, that moral evil is the result of ignorance. There can be order between the charioteer and the horses only if the charioteer is in control. Similarly, our human souls can achieve order and peace only if our rational part, our reason, is in control of our spirit and appetites. Throughout his account of the moral experience of human beings, Plato alternates between an optimistic view of our capacity for virtue and a rather negative opinion about whether we will fulfill our potentiality for virtue. This double attitude rests upon Plato's theory of moral evil. We have already seen Socrates' view that evil or vice is caused by ignorance, that is, by false knowledge. False knowledge occurs when our passions influence our reason to think that what appears to bring happiness will do so, although in reality it cannot. When my appetites thus overcome my reason, the unity of my soul is adversely affected. While there is still a unity, this new unity of my soul is inverted, since now my reason is subordinated to my appetites and has thereby lost its rightful place. What makes it possible for this disordered unity to occur, or what makes false knowledge possible, in short, what is the cause of moral evil? I mean, what do you think moral evil is? Who decides that? You know, is that something that's dictated personally? Let's find out. The cause of evil, ignorance or forgetfulness. We discover the cause of evil in the very nature of the soul and in the relation of the soul to the body. Before it enters the body, Plato says, the soul has a prior existence. As we have seen, the soul has two main parts, the rational and the irrational. This irrational part, in turn, is made up of two sections, the spirit and the appetites. Each of the two parts has a different origin. The rational part of the soul is created by the divine craftsman, that is, the demiurge. By contrast, the soul is created by the divine craftsman, that is, the demiurge. By contrast, the irrational part is created by the celestial gods, who also formed the body. Thus, even before it enters the body, the soul is composed from two separate sources. In the soul's prior existence, the rational part has a clear vision of the forms and of truth. At the same time, though, the spirit and appetites, by their very nature, already have a tendency to descend. If we ask why the soul descends into a body, Plato says that it's simply the tendency of the irrational part, the part of the soul that is not perfect, to be unruly and to pull the soul toward the earth. Plato Plato says that when perfect and fully winged, she, in quotations the soul, soars upward, whereas the imperfect soul, losing her wings and drooping in her flight, at last settles on the solid ground. There, finding a home, she receives an earthly creation, or she receives an earthly frame, and this composition of soul and body is called a living and mortal creation. Thus the soul falls, and that is how it becomes to be in a body. But the point is that the soul has an unruly and evil nature in its irrational parts, even before it enters the body. In one sense, then, the cause of evil is present even in the soul's pre existent state. It is in heaven that the soul alternates between seeing the forms or the truth and forgetting this vision, whereupon its decline sets in. Evil, on this view, is not a positive thing, but rather is a characteristic of the soul, wherein the soul is capable of forgetfulness. And I think that's an interesting way to describe evil. Because if you think about it, and a lot of times when someone gets mad or like is evil, like, I don't know, reminding certain things of human parts about them, or just reminding parts of humanistic qualities seems to like break through whatever wall they've created is. And so it's kind of interesting. It is those souls only that do forget that truth that in turn descend, being dragged down by the attraction for earthly things. The soul then is perfect in nature, but one aspect of its nature is this possibility to lapse into disorder. For the soul also contains the principle of imperfection, as do other parts of creation. Upon its entrance into the body, however, the difficulties of the soul are greatly increased. Upon the entrance into the body, however, the difficulties of soul are greatly increased. Yeah, I'd fucking say. Plato believed that the body stimulated the irrational part of the soul to overcome the rulership of reason. The soul's entrance into the body, therefore, is a further cause of disorder or the breakdown of the harmony between the various parts of the soul. For one thing, when the soul leaves the realm of the forms and enters the body, it moves from the realm of the one to the realm of the many. Now the soul is adrift in the bewildering sea of the multiplicity of things and subject to all sorts of errors because of the deceptive nature of these things. In addition, the body stimulates such activities in the irrational part of the soul as the indiscriminate search for pleasure, exaggerating such appetites as hunger, thirst, and the desire to procreate. This in turn can become lust. In the body, the soul experiences desire, pleasure, and pain, as well as fear and anger. There is love, too, for a wide range of objects. This varies from the simplest morsel that can satisfy some taste to a love of truth or beauty that is pure and eternal. All this suggests that the body acts as a sluggish encumbrance to the soul, and that the spirit and appetites of the soul are peculiarly susceptible to the workings of the body. In this way, then, our bodies disturb the harmony of our souls, for our bodies expose our souls to stimuli that deflect our reason from true knowledge or that prevent our reason from recalling the truth we once knew. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Oh, fuck. In that world of people, error is perpetuated whenever a society has the wrong values, causing individuals to accept as their own these wrong values. Every society inevitably acts as a teacher of its members, and for this reason, society's values become the values of individuals. Moreover, societies tend to perpetuate the evils and errors committed by earlier generations. Plato underscored this notion and suggested that, in addition to such a social transmission of evil, human souls would reappear through a transmigration, and bring into a new body their earlier errors and judgments of value. It is the body, in the final analysis, that accounts for ignorance, rashness, and lust, for the body disturbs that clear working of reason, spirit, and appetites by exposing the soul to a cascade of sensations. Looking back on Plato's account of human moral condition, we can see that he begins with a conception of the soul as existing independently of the body. In this state of In this state, the soul enjoys a basic harmony between its rational and irrational parts, a harmony wherein reason controls the spirit and appetites through its knowledge of the truth. But since the irrational part of the soul has the possibility of imperfection, it expresses the possibility by being attracted through its appetites to the lower regions, dragging with it the spirit and reason. Upon entering the body, the original harmony of the parts of the soul is the further disrupted, former knowledge is forgotten, and the inertia of the body obstructs the recovery of this knowledge. That's just like all like, yeah. All like, yeah. This human existence we've created has become a complete barrier and separator of soul. So, how do we get it back? Let's find out. Recovering lost morality. For Plato, morality consists in the recovery of our lost inner harmony. It means reversing the process by which our reason has been overcome by our appetites and the stimuli of our body. People always think that whatever they do will in some way give them pleasure and happiness. No one, Plato says, ever knowingly chooses an act that will be harmful to oneself. We may do wrong acts such as murder or lying. That's kind of wild to put quotations around, but okay. And even admit the wrongness of these acts, but we always assume that some benefit will come from them. This is false knowledge of kind of ignorance, which people must overcome in order to be moral. To say then that knowledge is virtue means that false knowledge must be replaced with an accurate appraisal of things or acts and their values. Before we can go from false to true knowledge, we must somehow become aware that we are in a state of ignorance. Before we can go from false to true knowledge, we must somehow become aware that we are in a state of ignorance. Before we can go from a state of false to true knowledge, we must somehow become aware that we are in a state of ignorance. It is as if we must be awakened from a sleep of ignorance. We can be awakened by something that is happening within us, or by something external to us, or by someone else. Similarly, with regard to knowledge, and particularly moral knowledge, human awakening works in these three ways. Assuming, as Plato does, that knowledge is lodged deeply in our memory, this latent knowledge will from time to time come to surface of our consciousness. What the soul once knew is raised to present awareness by the process of recollection. Recollection begins, first of all, when our minds experience difficulties with the seeming contradictions of sense experience. As we try to make sense of the multiplicity of things, we begin to go beyond the things themselves to ideas, and this action of our minds is set in motion by our experience of a problem that needs to be solved. Besides this internal source of awakening, Plato argues that this is also accomplished through a teacher. In his allegory of the cave, Plato depicted how people move from darkness to light, from ignorance to knowledge. But in this allegory, he portrays the attitude of self-satisfaction among the prisoners. They do not know that they are prisoners. They are chained by false knowledge and dwell in the darkness of ignorance. Excuse me. Their awakening must come through some teacher. As Plato says, their release from the chains and the healing of their unwisdom is brought about by their being forced suddenly to stand up, turn, and walk with eyes lifted up to the light. That is, someone must break off the prisoner's chain and turn him around. Then, having been forcibly released, he can be led step by step out of the cave. Socrates, with the power of his irony and the persistence of his Socrates, with the power of his irony and the persistence of his dialectic method, was one of history's most effective awakeners of people from their sleep of ignorance. But besides awakening us or breaking our chains, the effective teacher must turn us around so that we shift our gaze from shadows to the real world. Fuck it, let's keep going. Virtue as fulfillment of function. It's like, yeah, everything they're saying is just, yeah. Yeah. Socrates, with the power of his irony and the persistence of his dialectic method, was one of history's most effective awakeners of people from the sleep of ignorance. But besides awakening us or breaking our chains, the effective teacher must turn us around so that we shift our gaze from shadows to the real world. Virtue as fulfillment of function. Throughout his discussions of morality, Plato viewed the good life as the life of inner harmony, well being, and happiness. He frequently compared the good life to the efficient functioning of things. A knife is good, he said, when it cuts efficiently, that is, when it fulfills its function. We say of physicians that they are good when they fulfill the function of doctoring. Musicians are similarly good when they fulfill the function of their art. Plato then asks, has the soul a function that can be performed by nothing else? Living, said Plato, is likewise an art, and the soul's unique function is the art of living. Comparing the art of music with the art of living, Plato saw a close parallel, for in both cases, the art consists of recognizing and obeying the requirements of limit and measure. When musicians tune their instruments, they know that each string should be tightened just so much, no more and no less, for each string has its specific pitch. The musician's art consists, therefore, in acknowledging the limit beyond which a string should not be tightened, and in playing their instruments, observing the measure between intervals. In a similar way, sculptors may be ruled by a vivid awareness of measure and limit, for as they work with their mallets and chisels, they must regulate the force of each stroke according to the form they want to accomplish. Their strokes will be heavy as they begin to clear away the larger sections of marble, but as they work around the head of the statue, they must have a clear vision of the limits beyond which their chisels must not go, and their strokes must be gentle as they fashion the delicate features of the face. Similarly, the art of living requires a knowledge of limits and of measure. The soul has various functions, but these functions must operate within the limits and set by knowledge or intelligence. I'm going to reread that one. Similarly, the art of living requires a knowledge of limits and of measure. The soul has various functions, but these functions must operate within limits set by knowledge or intelligence. Because the soul has various parts, each part will have a special function. Since virtue is the fulfillment of function, there will be as many virtue as there are functions. Corresponding to the three parts of the soul are three virtues, which are achieved when these parts of respected of the soul are corresponding to the three parts of the soul are three virtues, which are achieved when those three parts are respectively fulfilling their functions. The appetites need to be kept within limits and in their measure, avoiding excesses so they don't usurp the position of the other parts of the soul. This moderation in pleasures and desires leads to the virtue of temperance, the energy of will, which issues from the spirited part of the soul, also needs to be kept within limits, avoiding rash or headlong action and becoming instead a trustworthy power in aggression and defensive behavior. By doing this, we achieve the virtue of courage. Reason achieves the virtue of wisdom when it remains undisturbed by the unrush of appetites and continues to see the true ideals in spite of the constant changes experienced in daily life. That's a big one. You just gotta let kind of like it go. Like when I lived in Brooklyn, I used to just think of it as like a film screen. Like it's just let it all go. Like you can't pick up all the stimuli. You gotta like just let it all go. you know. Fuck. I love this book. Between these three virtues, there are interconnections, for temperance is the rational control of the appetites, and courage is the rational ordering of the spirit. At the same time, each part of the soul has its own function, and when each is in fact fulfilling its special function, a fourth virtue, justice, is attained. For justice means giving to each its own due. Justice, then, is the general virtue, which reflects a person's attainment of well-being and inner harmony, which in turn is achieved only when every part of the soul is fulfilling its proper function. Less than appetite, right? Less is more. Always is. One beard. Less is more. Less is more. This is what I really wanted to get into. I know I'm already fucking a half hour into this, but his political philosophy to me is very interesting. I don't really want to make a stance on my political stand. Like, I don't want to place myself on a political spectrum at all, but like, I like what he has to say about it. Or it's interesting, okay? Like, you have to be able to bring shit up without like um, people immediately thinking that you're agreeing to it or supporting it, or encouraging it, spreading it. It's like you can bring something up just to acknowledge, address it, talk about it. Like we got to get back to that point. Anyways, Plato's political philosophy. In Plato's thought, political theory is closely connected with moral philosophy. In the Republic, he says that different classes of the state are like different parts of an individual soul. Likewise, the different types of states with their characteristic virtues and vices are analogues to different types of people. With their virtues and vices in both cases, we should analyze the health of the state or person in terms of whether the classes or parts are performing their functions well and have the proper relationships to one another. Indeed, Plato held that the state is like a giant person, as justice is the general virtue of the moral person. So also it is justice that characterizes the good society. In the Republic, Plato argues that the best way to understand that just person is to analyze the nature of the state. We should begin, he says, by inquiring what justice means in a state. Then we can go on to look for its counterpart on a smaller scale in the individual. That's good. Me saying that's good. Fucking Plato. The state is a giant person. For Plato, the state grows out of the nature of the individual so that the individual comes logically prior to the state. The state is a natural institution, natural because it reflects the structure of human nature. The origin of the state is a reflection of people's economic needs. For Plato says, a state comes into existence because no individual is self-sufficing. We all have many needs. Our many needs require many skills, and no one possesses all the skills needed to produce food, shelter, and clothing, as well as the various arts. Therefore, there must be a division of labor, for more things will be produced and the work more easily and better done. When every person is set free from all of the occupations to do at the right time, the one thing for which he is naturally fitted. I don't feel like we're in a place like that no more. Or have ever been, maybe, I don't know. Our needs are not limited to our, when my historical knowledge expands, I might be able to answer that better. Our needs are not limited to our physical requirements, for our goal is not simply survival, but a life higher than an animal's. Still, yeah, higher than an animal's. Still, the healthy, still, the health, Still, the healthly state soon becomes affected by a wide range of desires and swollen up with a whole multitude of callings, not ministering to any bare necessity. Now there will be hunters and fishermen, artists in sculpture, painting and music, poets with their attendant train of professional reciters, actors, dancers, producers, and makers of all sorts of household gear, including everything for women's adornment. And we shall want more servants, ladies' maids, barbers, cooks, and confectioners. This desire for more things will soon exhaust the resources of the community. And before long, Plato says, we shall have to cut off a slice of our neighbor's territory, and they will want a slice of ours. Therefore, neighbors will inevitably, therefore, neighbors will inevitably be at war. Wars have their origin in desires, which are the most fruitful sources of evils, both to individuals and states. With the inevitability of war, it will now be necessary to have a whole army to go out to battle with any invader, in defense of all this property and of the citizens. Thus emerge the guardians of the state, who at first represent the vigorous and powerful people who will repel the invader and preserve internal order. Now there are two distinct classes of people: those who fill all the crafts, farmers, artisans, and traders, and those who guard the community. From this latter class are then chosen the most highly trained guardians, who will become the rulers of the state and will represent a third and elite class. The relation between the individual and the state now becomes plain. The three classes in the state are an extension of the three parts of the soul. The craftspeople or artisans represent as a class the lowest part of the soul, namely the appetites. The guardians embody the spirited element of the soul, and the highest class, the rulers, represents the rational element. So far, the analysis seems quite plausible, since it does not strain our imagination to see the connection, one, between the individual's appetites and the class of workers who satisfy these appetites, and two, between the spirited element in people and the large scale version of this dynamic force in the military establishment. Three being between the rational element and the unique function of leadership in the ruler, but Plato was aware that it would not be easy to convince people to accept this system of classes in the state, particularly if they found themselves in a class that might not be the one they would choose if they had the chance. The assignment of all people to their respective classes would come only after extensive training, and only those capable of doing so would progress to the higher levels. Although theoretically all people would have the opportunity to reach the highest level, they would in fact stop at the level of their natural aptitudes. To make all of them satisfied with their lot, Plato thought it would be necessary to employ a convenient fiction, a single bold flight of invention. He writes, I shall try to convince first the rulers and the soldiers, and then the whole community, and that the all the I shall try to convince first the rulers and the soldiers, and then the whole community, that all that nurture and education which we gave them was only something they seemed to experience as it were a dream. In reality, they were the whole time down inside the earth being molded and fashioned, and at last, when they were complete, the earth sent them up from her womb into the light of day. This noble lie would also say that the God who fashioned all people mixed gold in the composition of those who were to rule, and put silver in the guardians, and iron and brass in farmers and craftspeople. This implied by nature some would be rulers and other craftspeople, and would provide the basis for a perfectly stratified society. But whereas later societies in Europe assumed their children born into such a stratified society would stay at the level at which they were born, Plato recognized that children would not always have the same quality as their parents. He said, therefore, that among the injunctions laid by heaven upon the rulers, there is none that needs to be so carefully watched as the mixture of metals in the souls of children. If a child of carefully watched If a child of their own is born with an alloy of iron or brass, they must, without the smallest pity, assign him the station proper to his nature, and thrust him out among the farmers and craftspeople. Similarly, if a child with gold or silver is born to craftspeople, they will promote him accordingly to his value. Most importantly, Plato thought that everyone should agree on who is to be the ruler, and agree also on why the ruler should be obeyed. I mean, yeah, I guess, like they will promote him according to his value. I don't see that being an issue. It sounded a little off at the beginning, but then like it kind of saved itself, but they will promote him according to his value, you know? But like how you judging the alloy of somebody, that gets very fucking, yeah, I don't know. Who's the judge of that? Now, this is the part that I was really interested in, and then I'll stop. But the Philosopher King. I made an episode about this previously, I believe, on like the first time I talked about Plato, but I want to bring it up again because it coincides with the rest of this episode. I'm already 45 minutes in, so if you're watching this, you must be invested into something. And so let's finish it out, right? So, the Philosopher King. Plato believed the competence should be the qualification for authority. The ruler of the state should be the one who has the peculiar abilities to fulfill the function. Disorder in the state is caused by the same circumstances that produce disorder in the individual, namely the attempt on the part of the lower elements to usurp the role of the higher faculties. In both the individual and the state, the uncontrolled drives of the appetites and spirited action lead to internal anarchy. At both levels, the rational element must be in control. Who should be the captain of a ship? Should be the most popular person or the one who knows the art of navigation? Who should rule the state? Should it be someone whose training is in war or in commerce? The ruler said Plato should be the one. The ruler said Plato should be the one who has been fully educated and has come to understand the difference between the visible world and the intelligible world, between the realm of opinion and the realm of knowledge, between appearance and a reality. In short, the philosopher king is one whose education has led him step by step through the ascending degrees of knowledge of the divided line until at last he has a knowledge of the good, that synoptic vision of the inner relation of all truths to each other. To reach this point, the philosopher king would have progressed through many stages of education. This part I find very, very interesting because I just find myself coinciding with the development of this very weirdly, but again, you read fucking horoscopes, you go, oh my God, that's me. So it's like fucking the same shit probably. But by the time he's 18 years old, he would have training in literature, music, and elementary mathematics. His literature would be censored, for Plato also, I'm sorry. By the time he's 18 years old, he would have training in literature, music, and elementary mathematics. His literature would be censored, for Plato accused certain poets of outright falsehood and impious accounts of the behavior of gods. Plato accused certain poets of outright falsehood and impious accounts of the behavior of gods. That's interesting because Friedrich Nietzsche accused, I think, poets of exploiting their experiences. So it's interesting. Philosophers don't like poets, I guess. I don't know. They got something. They got some strife, something. They got a problem. They got beef. I don't know what the fuck to say. All right. So now music would also be prescribed so that seductive music would be replaced by a more wholesome variety. For the next few years, there would be extensive physical and military training, and at age 20, a few would be selected to pursue an advanced course in mathematics. At age 30, a 5-year course in dialectic and moral philosophy would begin. The next 15 years would be spent gathering practical evidence through public service. Finally, at age 50, the ablest person would reach the highest level of knowledge, the vision of the good, and would then be ready for the task of governing the state. I fucking like that. Like, when I first read that, I fucking liked that. I liked the whole thing. Like, the development of the character, the qualities that they're getting. I think maybe adding some, I mean, maybe there was some I might have missed it. And I mean, yeah, it's sort of like moral philosophy and things, but like just as long as there's also some sort of spiritual development alongside all of those things as well, I believe that would create some sort of, I don't like the word ruler. That sounds very authoritarian, but you know, yeah, I guess I don't want to think of another word right now. So ruler, but yeah, that seems like it would make the best. It would give us our best shot. Seems like. Now the virtues in the state. Whether justice could ever be achieved in a state would depend, Plato thought, upon whether the philosophical element in society could attain dominance. He writes, I was forced to say in the praise of the correct philosophy that it affords a vantage point from which we can distinguish in all cases what is just for communities and for individuals. He also believed the human race will not be free of evils until either the stock of those who rightly and truly follow philosophy acquire political authority, or the class who have power in the cities be led by some divine intervention to become real philosophers. But justice, as we already have seen, is a general virtue. It means that all parts are fulfilling their special functions and are achieving their respective virtues. Justice in the state can be attained only if the three classes fulfill their functions. As the craftspeople embody the element of the appetites, they will also reflect the virtue of temperance. Temperance is not limited to craftspeople, but applies to all the classes, since when it is achieved, it shows the willingness of the lower to be ruled by the higher. Still, temperance applies in a special way to the craftspeople insofar as they are the lowest class and must be subordinate to the higher two levels. The guardians who defend the state manifest the virtue of courage. To assure that these guardians will always fulfill their function, special training and provision are made for them. Unlike the craftspeople who marry and own property, the guardians will have both property and wives in common. Plato considered these arrangements essential if the guardians were to attain true courage, for courage means knowing what to fear and what not to fear. The only real object of fear for the guardian should be fear of moral evil. He must never fear poverty or privation, and for this reason his type of life should be isolated from possessions. I like it. I still like it. Although wives would be held in common, this does not imply a form of sexism. On the contrary, Plato believed that men and women were equal in respect to certain things. For example, a man and a woman have the same nature and both have a talent for medicine. This being the case, they should both be assigned the same task whenever they possess the appropriate talent. For this reason, Plato believed that both men and women could be guardians. I like that. In order to preserve the unity of the members of the class of guardians, the permanent individual family would be abolished and the whole class would become a single family. Plato's reasoning here was the guardians must be free from not only the temptation to acquire property, but also from the temptation to prefer the advantages of one's families to those of the state. Moreover, he thought it was foolish to take such pains in breeding racing dogs and horses, and at the same time rely on pure chance in producing the guardians and rulers of the state. For this reason, sexual relations would be strictly controlled and would be limited to the special marriage festivals. These festivals would occur at stated times, and the partners, under the illusion that they had been paired by drawing lots, would instead be brought together through the careful manipulation of the rulers to ensure the highest eugenic possibilities. Eugenic possibilities means basically just like, human genes, basically. So, like, they're going to have, like, most beautiful babies ever. Best, like, if you were making their chromosomes, you were hand selecting them, Plato does not Plato does say that young men who performed well in war and other duties should be given, among other rewards and privileges, more liberal opportunities to sleep with a wife, but only for the practical purpose that with good excuse as many as possible of the children may be born of such fathers. As soon as children were born to the guardians, they would be taken in charge by officers appointed for that purpose and reared in a nursery school in a special part of the city. Under these circumstances, Plato thought the guardians would be most likely to fulfill their true nature of defending the state without being defected by other concerns and would thereby achieve their appropriate virtue of courage. Justice in the state is therefore the same as justice in the individual. It is the product of people staying in their place and doing their special task. Justice is the harmony of virtues of temperance. Justice is the harmony of the virtues of temperance, courage, and wisdom. Since the state is made up of individuals, it is also necessary for each of these virtues to be attained by each person. For example, even craftspeople must have the virtue of wisdom, not only to keep their appetites in check, but also to know that they rightly belong where they are and must obey the rules. Similarly, as we have seen, the guardians must have sufficient wisdom to know what to fear and what not to fear, so that they can develop genuine courage. Most importantly, the ruler must come as close as possible to a knowledge of the good, for the well-being of the state depends on the ruler's knowledge and character. Yeah, I'd say that. Now, this part is my interesting part. When I first got this book, this was like this. I don't know how. I think I just opened up the book, and this is the page that it went to, and I was like, "Damn!" I was like, "Whoa! Like, what's going on here?" But it does. You'll see. You have your own opinion. You got your own brain. You can comprehend interpret it however you'd like, and that's the beauty of life and creativity and your own self. Yes, all right. So the decline of the ideal state, right? This is Plato's ideas. So the decline of the ideal state. Plato argued that if a state were a giant person, then it would reflect the kind of people a community has become. What he had in mind was that although human nature is fixed and that all people possess a tripartite soul, the kind of people they become will depend on the degree of internal harmony they achieve. Okay? Okay? The kind of people they become will depend on the degree of internal harmony they achieve. I can't say that shit loud enough. The state will therefore, you still won't fucking hear it, who cares? The state will therefore reflect these variations in human character. For this reason, Plato argued that constitutions cannot come out of sticks and stones. They must result from the preponderance of certain characters, which draw the rest of the community in their wake. So if there are 5 forms of government, there must be 5 kinds of mental constitution among individuals. And these 5 forms of government are aristocracy, timocracy, plutocracy, democracy, and despotism. Plato considered the transition from aristocracy to despotism as a step-by-step decline in the quality of the state corresponding to a gradual deterioration of the moral character of rulers and citizens. His ideal state was an aristocracy in which the rational element embodied the philosopher king was supreme and in which people's reason controlled their appetites. Plato emphasized that, although there was only an ideal, it was nevertheless a very significant target to aim at. He was deeply disenchanted with politics, particularly because of the way Athens had executed Socrates. Yeah, I'd say. And had failed to produce consistently good leaders. As I gazed upon the whirlpool of public life, he writes, I saw clearly in regard to all states now existing that without exception their system of government is bad. Still, the norm for a state is aristocracy, since in that form we find the proper subordination of all classes. Even if this ideal were achieved, however, there would be a possibility for change, since nothing is permanent, and aristocracy would decline first of all into a timocracy. This represents a degeneration. If for democracy represents the love of honor, and insofar as ambitious members of the ruling class love their own honor more than the common good, the spirited part of the soul has usurped the role of reason. Although this is only a small break in the structure of the soul, it does begin a process whereby the irrational part assumes a progressively larger role. It is a short step from love of honor to the desire of wealth, which means allowing the appetites to rule. Even under democracy, there would be a beginning of a system of private property, and this degree for riches paves the way for a system of government called plutocracy, in which power resides in the hands of people whose main concern is wealth. And Plato says, as the rich rise in social esteem, the virtuous sink. What is problematic about plutocracy, according to Plato, is that it breaks the unity of the state into 2 contending classes, the rich and the poor. Moreover, plutocrats are consumers of goods, and when they have used up their money, they become dangerous because they want more of what they have become accustomed to. The plutocrat is like the person who seeks constant pleasure, but the very nature of pleasure is that it is momentary and must therefore be repeated. There can never be a time of perfect satisfaction for the seeker of pleasure. I'm sorry about that. There can never be a time of perfect satisfaction. The seeker of pleasure can never be satisfied any more than a leaky pail can be filled. There can never be a time of perfect satisfaction. The seeker of pleasure can never be satisfied any more than a leaky pail can be filled. Still, the plutocrat knows how to distinguish 3 sorts of appetites, the necessary, the unnecessary, and the lawless, and so is torn between many desires. His better desires will usually keep the upper hand over the worse, and so the plutocrat, Plato says, presents a more decent appearance than many. Democracy is a further degeneration. Plato says, for its principles of equality and freedom reflect the degenerate human characters whose whole range of appetites are all pursued with equal freedom. To be sure, Plato's concept of democracy and his criticism of it were based on his first-hand experience with the special form that democracy took in the city-state of Athens. Here, democracy was direct in that all citizens had the right to participate in the government. The Athenian assembly consisted, theoretically, at least of all citizens over 18 years of age. Thus, Plato did have in mind Thus, Plato did not have in mind modern liberal and representative democracy. What he saw in his day was rather a type of direct popular government that clearly violated his notion that the rulership of a state should be in the hands of those with a special talent and training for it. What produced this spirit of equality was the gradual legitimizing of all the appetites under the plutocracy by the sons of the more restrained father, plutocrats, whereby the aim of life was to become as rich as possible, and said Plato, this insatiable craving would bring about the transition to democracy, for a society cannot hold wealth and honor and at the same time establish self-control to its citizens and its citizens. Plato says this insatiable craving would bring about the transition to democracy, for a society cannot hold wealth and honor and at the same time establish self-control in its citizens. Even the dogs in the democracy exhibit equality and independence by refusing to move out of the way in the streets. It is, however, when the rich and the poor find themselves in a contest under plutocracy and sorry. It is, however, when the rich and poor find themselves in a contest under plutocracy that the turning point is reached, for when the poor win, the result is democracy. Then liberty and free speech are rife everywhere. Anyone is allowed to do what he likes. Now you are not obliged to be in authority or to submit to authority if you do not like. All this political equality and freedom stem from a soul whose order has been shattered. It is a soul whose appetites are now all equal and free and act as a mob of passions. The life of liberty and equality declines that one appetite as... I'm sorry, it's hard to read with this. I'm going to reread that one part. All this political equality and freedom stem from a soul whose order has been shattered. It is a soul whose appetites are now all equal and act as a mob of passions. The life of liberty and equality declares that one appetite is as good as another and all must have their equal rights. But the continuous indulgence of the appetites leads inevitably to the point at which a single master passion will finally enslave the soul. We cannot yield to every craving without finally yielding to the strongest and most persistent passion. At this point, we say that we are under the tyranny of our master passion. Likewise, in the state, the passion for money and pleasure leads the masses to plunder the rich. As the rich resist, the masses seek out a stronger person who will be their champion. But this person demands and acquires absolute power and makes slaves of the people. And only later do the people realize to what depths of subjugation they have fallen. This is the unjust society, the enlargement of the unjust soul. The natural end of democracy is a despotism. And I believe despotism means just authoritarianism and totalitarianism, but let me just check it up, and like the fall of society. But in political sense, despotism is a form of government in which a single entity rules with absolute power. Normally, that entity is an individual, the despo, as in autocracy, but societies which limit respect and power to specific groups have also been called despotic. So it's interesting to think about in terms of what's been going on in today's world and just what he's been saying about what he just said. There's a lot, but man, the whole appetites taking over the soul seems about right. All passions are given like equal freedom and things like that, and like I'm not saying anything, again, like, it doesn't mean I agree with anything, like, negative. I'm just saying, like, the wide spectrum of liberty, I do believe, breeds some sort of negative consequence. It has to. I think in order for there to be something, there has to be some set of rules and some set of, like, not shame, but public shaming of certain acts. Certain acts should not be encouraged like they have been. And even if you don't want to admit to yourself that they've been encouraged, then just out in the open as they are. I think things need to become more personal and traditional, and we'll find more value and quality within our own lives if we were to do so. I guess just wake up.